everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of When I Grew Up. On today's episode, I have a friend of mine named Joojin Kim, and he's here to tell us what he does and about his job. Hey, Joojin, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for joining me today. I feel like we met, right before you got married, right?
Yeah, I think it was through Servants Network
Oh,
back in the
okay.
day.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I remember now.
Yeah.
Um, you're not originally from Atlanta, though, right?
No, I'm not.
Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Korea, but then I grew up in Orange County, California, and then so
Oh,
yeah, I spent my childhood and I went to high school there, and then went to college up in Cornell University in upstate New York, and then moved down here after I graduated in 2013. So I've been here
oh,
about for 7 years now.
why did you move to Atlanta?
It was kind of the only job I had.
Okay.
But then, but also, I really hated the cold of
hmm
being in upstate New York and the
hmm
Northeast. So it worked out, and my family was here at the time too. So
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
it
So
all
they
worked out
moved
well.
from LA, from Orange County.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they moved independently of me, but then I just happened to find a job in Atlanta. And then at the time, my first job was working for Starwood Hotels, which it doesn't exist anymore. It's been acquired by Marriott Hotels. But yeah, that was my first job coming into Atlanta in 2013.
Oh, wow. I actually remember Starwood Hotels, honestly. But so what
Yeah.
did you do for them when you were working?
For them, I was an analyst revenue management. So revenue management is, which I'll probably talk about later too, is a function that's pretty unique to the hospitality industry and travel industry. So, hotels, airlines, rental cars, and cruise. So revenue management is basically the practice of, maximizing revenue because in those industries, the product or service that we sell are perishable goods. So like for example, in the retail, if you can't sell this computer today, you can just store it up and then sell it tomorrow. But then for something like hotel rooms or airline seats, if you can't sell it for that flight or that night, like that's lost opportunity in terms of what you're selling. So the idea is to like understand the customers and then making sure that we are getting the most, like we're maximizing the customer's willingness to pay for their products by understanding them, and then just building our revenue or maximizing our revenue in that way.
Holy
Does that,
smokes.
yeah,
Yeah, no,
does
I
that make sense?
understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Gosh. So is that similar to what you do now?
So what I do now is I'm in the network planning team of Delta Airlines, and which that means is basically it's the team that determines where Delta flies. So we determine where we fly, what aircraft we're flying, and when we're flying, whether it's time of the year or what time of the day, those kind of things. But I did initially get into Delta Airlines with my revenue management experience at hotels. So, like I mentioned, revenue management is very unique to these industries. So, my experience that I had with revenue management in the hotels allowed me to join Delta in their revenue management team. Eventually, yeah, I moved to the network planning team of Delta.
Okay. So
Yeah,
back up just for a second. Um, so a few questions that come immediately to my head, Jujin, is like,
yeah.
is that a
Uh,
major? Like, did you major in this?
no, well, I majored in hospitality administration. So, think of it as just like a business degree, but focusing on the hospitality industry. So,
Oh,
as part of like my curriculum, in that I did study a bit of revenue management and just the concept of it. But no, it's just I guess one aspect of business, like similar to how for other companies, marketing is a big aspect, human resources is one aspect, finance is one aspect, but for airlines and hotel, revenue management is just kind of another branch that doesn't exist anywhere else
yeah, because
in
that
most
makes
other
complete
companies. Yeah,
sense. Like, how are you going
yeah,
to sell your product day to day if it just kind of like goes to
hmm
waste every single day if it's not
yeah,
being sold?
and that's the art, I guess, the art and science of it. Because when you think of an airline seat, if you're going from New York to LA, for example, you as a person who's there for to visit family, you probably don't want to fork up more than $300-400, because you're paying out of your pocket, and you have your husband, 2 kids, so it's a lot of money for a leisure traveler. And so what you want to do as a leisure traveler is to buy it for as cheap as possible. But on the opposite end of that, you have a business traveler who is not paying out of their pocket, their company's paying for it, and so they're willing to fork up $2,000 just to get the last minute seat on that same exact flight. So ultimately, what we're doing is providing that same exact service per se, getting you from point A to point B, but depending on what your needs are and what kind of customer you are, you have a very different willingness to pay. And so what we're trying to do is kind of optimize that and maximize that, from the revenue management. Does that make sense?
Okay, so it makes sense.
It might be yeah.
I'm just curious, so how does one even start that process? What does this brainstorming session look like in order for you to optimize for the person that's purchasing it? Does my question make any sense?
So I mean, it's not necessarily optimizing it for the person purchasing it, but it's optimizing how we fill up our airplanes.
Okay. So how does that work?
So in an ideal, because so in an ideal world, we want the entire plane to be filled with business customers who are paying thousands of dollars per seat, right? Because then our plane is full, and we get most revenue out of that. But unfortunately, in reality, we can't find 200 business passengers every day going from LA to JFK. And so when you think of booking an airfare, we have our schedules out for 330 days out. So basically, if you were to book today, you can book as far out as 330 days later from today, right?
Okay.
But so we used kind of the different behaviors of the customers. Like, for example, if you are a customer looking to buy travel for vacation, you're going to be thinking months out, right? And so basically what we do is we open up inventory on the plane at the lower price point, to allow these kind of leisure customers to book to maybe 20, 30%, 40% of the aircraft. And as the aircraft fills up, and as we get closer to the day of departure, the price points will start going up, because obviously demand, supply and demand. So if there's less seats available now, we're going to charge you more. And then kind of on the opposite end of that, let's say the flight is departing tomorrow and we have 5-10 seats left to sell, but a business executive realizes that they need to travel across the country for a big meeting last minute. They're going to do whatever it takes to make that flight. So they're going to pay us. They're willing to pay us a lot more for that seat. So in a way, it's kind of like like that example where you have like a bucket and you first fill it with the big rocks and then the small rocks and then like the little sands to make sure that you're actually filling up the bucket, as opposed, because if you do the sand first, you can't put in the big rocks and things like that. It's kind of like that where all of our flights and even hotel rooms, you need to start with like some of the like a different segment of people, which is like usually the leisure customers who are paying less. And then once we are able to hit a certain certain load factor, which is basically how full the plane is, we can start also filling up with some of the other types of customers, like a business customer. And so we're trying to optimize that balance to make sure that the plane fills as full as possible, and also by having the customers pay the highest fare possible.
Okay, so everything you just said, I feel like honestly is kind of common sense. Like if you think about it, like that makes perfect sense to do it that way. But I find it extremely fascinating that to hear you talk about it in this way, because again, with all of the jobs that I have been interviewing, the people that work and do these really odd end jobs, it's not odd end, it's just things you don't think about.
Right,
As
yeah.
a leisure flyer, I never think about that. But it makes sense because, yes, if I'm planning a trip to go to Florida with my kids, in March, I'm going to start looking now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, then everyone kind of knows, if the earlier you look, it's going to be a little bit cheaper. The closer you get to the date, it goes higher. But okay, like, what about frequent flyers and stuff, like,
Uh-huh.
and mileage and things like that. Like, are you
Uh-huh.
guys just covering the cost? I've always wondered that.
What you mean? When do we use miles or?
Okay, so like my dad is a frequent flyer and he has a lot of miles and then he uses
Mhm,
those miles to pay for tickets, right?
mhm,
So
yeah.
like is that just like where you guys are just covering the cost of that mileage because of the amount of money was already spent? Or do you get what I'm
No,
asking?
well, so miles can be used from a strategic perspective as well, at least from revenue management side too. So oftentimes we have when you find a good deal in terms of miles, it's because we're seeing distressed, and we're basically selling distressed inventory. So basically, based on the trends that we're seeing, or for the dates, where, like, for example, if you're looking at um, maybe like that like period between like Christmas and New Year's, it might be a little dead because people already travel like kind of either before Christmas or like after New Year's. So if you have a date where we know it's going to be weak in terms of like our load factor, how full the plane gets, what we can do is use that as kind of a lever in terms of miles, so that if we look like we're giving our customers a great deal, but it's really because no one else is booking those seats. And
What?
so that's
That's
one
crazy.
way. I mean, so that's one way. So that's one way we can use it. But obviously, sometimes we do. I mean, we allow like the mile bookings to come. So, like for example, if an airplane has like 200 seats, right? Typically, I mean, I can get into a lot more of the technical details, but that
Let's
might
get
not
into
be.
it. I want to
It might
hear.
just be. Uh, okay, so I'm trying to explain it. So basically, I mean, I guess to put it simply, if we have 200 seats on a plane, the airline is willing to allocate about, and this is an arbitrary number, like 5 to 10% of those seats to customers that are paying with miles. Um, and again, and that number of allocated seats for miles could be different based on just the market and the seasonality, like the time of the year. So, like for example, in the winter, everyone is for winter, a hot market would be like Hawaii. Everyone wants to fly to Hawaii in the winter, right? So if that's the case, we might not allow as many my award bookings, or we might increase the price of the miles so that it makes it a little harder for customers to book, because there are customers out there that are willing to pay top dollars to go to Hawaii in the winter,
Mm.
right? But then for, like, let's say you're trying to go to Oklahoma City on a Tuesday in August. No, there really isn't a demand for that. So you might
Mhm.
find a good deal in terms of what is available in terms of your award ticket for dates like that. So so the miles can be used in a very strategic way to help us fill those seats, because regardless, it is a customer, and it's also it's a good I guess it's a good experience for the customer to be able to redeem
Yeah, it
those
is.
miles for a
I, like,
ticket.
feel so
Uh,
good about it every time.
yeah,
Like, I
yeah.
got a
So
free ticket, kind of.
yeah, but yeah, we're definitely using that in a strategic way. So it's not like we're giving away free seats. It's just we're. But again, it really depends on the exact market and the time of year and time of day, even.
Sure, yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
was just really curious. It really has nothing to do with your job.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a
Um,
fair question, but that's something that we would have done in revenue management.
so you're not in revenue management now, you mentioned. You're in a
No,
different
no.
department.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that department a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess to kind of help transition with that, basically, I got my foot in the door at Delta because of my revenue management experience at a hotel company, and then from there, when you think of an airline, the kind of the three core departments of an airline is revenue management, network planning, and sales. And the way those three departments work is basically network plans where we're going to fly and what we're going to fly. Revenue management determines the pricing of how we're going to fill those seats, and sales is the one that actually bring people through the door. So
Mm.
those three teams kind of like work together to maximize our revenue and profits. And when I was working in revenue management, basically I wanted to experience kind of the other side of the coin per se, and have that experience in one of the other two core commercial departments. And so for me, just with my personality being the way it is, I figured sales just wasn't the right fit for me, which is why I moved on to network planning, just to understand, a core function of an airline. And similar to revenue management, network planning is a department that is very unique to the airline, and it's specifically to the airline because you don't find network planning in a hotel company. Whereas revenue management, you can find that in a rental car company or a hotel company. So yeah, that's how I ended up in network planning, which is the
Okay.
current role. Yeah.
So you said network planning, you decide like what route they're taking in the flight, and then also like what type of plane is being used for a
Hmm.
specific flight.
Yes.
So, I guess I don't know what to ask other than like, what does a typical day look like for you then?
Uh, and I guess all of this will be all pre-COVID because post-COVID things are very different. But so when you think of network planning, it's split into two major, I guess, silos of the department. So one is the planning side, which is where I am, and basically, as the name describes, it's what we're planning to do. So as you mentioned, I don't know if you've ever seen like a route map, or if you ever flown on Delta or any airline, you typically have like the magazine in the back seat, and on the back there's like a map
Yes.
of
And they
all
like
the where we
show all
fly.
of the yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, exactly. So if you're familiar with that, that's what network planning does. We figure out where we're going to fly, what aircraft we're using in the fleet, and then so we have that planning aspect of network planning, and then the other half, who we work closely with, is the scheduling team. So they're the ones that actually work with the operations, the airports, the pilots, the crew, to make sure that what we're planning to fly actually works from an operational standpoint, right?
There's
Because
so many parts. There's so many moving parts. I like
there
have
is.
never thought about it, but it's like, yeah, like how are because it's not just Delta flying. There are other
Mhm.
airlines that are flying, and it's just okay. Anyways, yes, keep going.
Yeah. So it is a lot of moving parts, and it is a lot of coordination with the operational side, and even just other governments, because it's not like just because we want to fly somewhere doesn't mean we can just start flying there. We need the proper government approvals, and the proper infrastructure set up so that if we fly to a new destination, we have the correct personnel and staff to handle cargo, to handle the passengers, and even like aircraft cleaning and maintenance and turning the aircraft around. So it's a lot of coordination, and it's a team sport, I guess. That would be a good way to put it. But yeah, that's, I guess, kind of what network planning is in a nutshell.
So what does a typical day look like for you?
Oh yeah. So typical day, I mean, it's different because network planning is such a like a long-term event. Looks like, for example, we're planning seasons at a time. So usually, um, so the airline schedule is split into two seasons, winter and summer, and that's because they're just vastly different in terms of where people want to go and how what the demand is. Obviously, summer we have a very high peak where there's a lot of leisure travelers and things like that. Winter is a lot less leisure and more business and stuff like that. And so on a day-to-day basis, I guess, like, one of the more common things that we do is we create forecasts, like a financial forecast for our flights, especially when it comes to new markets or when we're changing up a market, basically to tell our leaders that this market will be profitable or it won't be profitable based on this kind of aircraft we're flying, based on this kind of demand that we're seeing, and just based on the like the competitive landscape that we're up against. So creating that financial forecast is a pretty core function of like what I do as a network planner, because if we do fly these new markets or if we do deploy a new aircraft, we want to make sure that we're making money off of it, because ultimately that's what we need to do. We need to make money on our flights. And so financial forecasting is one. Another thing is capacity planning. So as you may or may not be aware, airlines also have partnerships and alliances across the ocean. So domestically, not so much because we're such a like a powerful airline, like domestically. But when you think of, so me, I work on the transatlantic network planning specifically. So basically anything flying over the Atlantic Ocean to Europe, Africa, and Middle East. And on that side of the ocean, we have our partners, Air France, KLM, and Virgin Atlantic. And so
Oh.
we need to work together with these partners to manage our capacity, and our capacity being how many seats that we're flying every day across the ocean. And the reason why we need to manage that and balance that is because, if you have, obviously, so revenue management is more working on the demand side of things, whereas network planning, we're working on the supply side of things. So if you dump too many seats when there isn't enough demand, we can't charge as high because there's just too many seats flying across the ocean. So we need to make sure we also understand the demand patterns and then have the appropriate number of seats or flights flying at depending on what time of the year to make sure that the capacity is optimal. But we also need to consider, what our partners are doing, what our competitors are doing to make sure that we are, properly balanced. And so the thing about the partnership across the Atlantic is that every time we grow or shrink, we want to try to do it equitably as possible because we are partners. So for example, just because I want to fly 4 flights JFK New York doesn't mean our partner, I'm sorry, not JFK New York, JFK Heathrow. That doesn't mean our partner Virgin Atlantic, who's based out of the UK, should also fly 4 times JFK Heathrow, because then now we as partners, we are flying 8 times a day, and that's just too much. And so we need to make sure that we're balanced in that way, and we want to make sure that we're growing in a sustainable way in terms of that capacity. Does that make sense? I kind of like.
No, it all makes sense.
Okay.
It's just a lot of
Something you never think about.
information and things I've never thought about. But I'm wondering, Joojin, so like it seems like again, a lot of moving parts. It seems like, so do you draw, okay, so do you come up with these plans through data, or
it's a mix. It's a mix of both. It's kind of like arts and science, where we do use like demand data and like financial forecasts to see what is feasible and what is possibly profitable in these things. And so we do a lot of modeling where we basically look at a schedule or like the capacity and say like, okay, well, if American and British Airway, if they add this many seats to this market, and then if we add this many seats and our partner adds this many seats, what is that demand? How is that demand going to be split up across the different carriers? And so we have to look at it in an OND fashion, which is origin destination. So even if we fly JFK Heathrow, for example, actually that's a bad example. Let's say JFK Amsterdam. Even though we Delta and our partner KLM fly JFK Amsterdam, it's not necessarily carrying the passengers from just New York to Amsterdam and back. We're carrying all of US and we're funneling that into JFK, and then it goes to Amsterdam. And then from Amsterdam, our partners KLM have an intra-Europe network. And so from Amsterdam, it's going to Copenhagen, Stockholm, Istanbul, everywhere. So we need to consider how and where all these different traffic combinations are going whenever we decide what to add or reduce on the transatlantic flight, because that is like that main connection between all thousands of markets in US to the thousands of markets, or not thousands, but like hundreds of markets in the Europe side. So that's where I guess like the data side comes in, where we need to understand, okay, well, obviously the demand from like Omaha to New York to Amsterdam is not going to be much, but maybe Atlanta, New York, Amsterdam, there is a significant demand there. So we need to make sure that all the dots are connected in terms of the schedule. So that's where we also need to work with like our domestic team to make sure that the Atlanta JFK flight is optimal, so that the passengers from Atlanta can connect in JFK to go to Amsterdam. And then we need to coordinate with KLM to make sure that all the flights from Amsterdam to Copenhagen, whatever, is also optimal, so that the customer can all connect in an efficient way. Because you also don't want a connection where it's like a 30-minute connection and you're like, and the customer is like running to the next gate, and we don't want that. So ideally, depending on the airport, we have a minimum connection time, MCT. And so there's a ton of factors for us to consider before we even add or change a flight.
What's the minimum connection time? Just out of curiosity.
It depends on the airport,
Okay,
and it
okay.
also depends on the direction. So if you're
Okay.
going, yeah, so it varies, but it can be as short as 30 minutes. It can be as long as 90 minutes.
Okay, so Chujin, I'm gonna be completely honest with you right now.
Uh-huh.
Um, it all sounds extremely stressful. Do you get stressed? Like,
Uh,
or
no, I mean, I think once you are like once you're in the weeds and once you're used to it, it's not. I mean, it sounds. I think it could sound overwhelming if you just don't know how it works. Um, but then once you're in there, it could be a little overwhelming at times. But at the end of the day, there's only a handful of ONDs or markets that really matter.
uh-huh.
So ultimately, those are the ones that you need to focus on, and you don't really need to focus on markets like Omaha going to Amsterdam because they just don't bring enough value to our network. There isn't somebody out there from Omaha trying to pay us $2,000 to get to Europe. So it's something we need to consider, but it's not something that we need to focus on per se. And so usually, if you look at like the top 30 US markets to Europe, that covers probably like 80 to 90% of the demand. And that's good enough for us.
This is so fascinating. I love it. It's so crazy to me. Um, okay, so like so you mentioned like, once you're in it, it's not and you like understand what's going on and you've been doing it for a while, you get used to it. But in the beginning, was it a little bit of a learning curve for you, or did you feel already like in your element?
Oh no, for sure. It was a huge learning curve because it is so unique to the airline industry. And again, as a customer, it's not something you really think about. You just because as a customer, you always have just that one destination in mind, which is where you're going to go. You don't need to care about all these different connections and all these different connections behind you and connections in front of you, like in terms of like if you're going from Atlanta to Amsterdam through JFK, you're not going to care about all the other connections coming in to JFK. And then you're not going to care about all the connecting passengers from Amsterdam and beyond. So from a customer's perspective, yeah, it's something that you never think about. But as a network planner, you need to consider all the different combinations and and where the valuable traffic is coming from to make sure that we are optimized in terms of our scheduling and also our flights and even just the gauge, which is basically how big the aircraft is in terms of seats. So if you're so for example, markets like what we call hub to hub, basically, are you familiar with like the hub and spoke system of an airline?
No. Educate
Okay,
me.
so when you look at a map of like in the in-flight magazine,
Okay.
right? So typically there are just key cities where it acts as kind of like a central hub. Like for example, Delta Air Atlanta is a big hub, right?
Yes.
And so what we mean by hub and spoke is like if you think of like a bicycle wheel, at the center, you have the hub and then you have all the spokes going out of it, right? So what we mean by hub and spoke is basically we have a handful of key hubs, like for Delta, it's Atlanta, Detroit, Minneapolis, Salt Lake City. We basically funnel in all the small cities into Atlanta, and then we get one big plane to connect from Atlanta to Amsterdam. And then from Amsterdam, we have a lot more smaller planes with our partner KLM, and they funnel that out from their hub, which is Amsterdam. So,
Okay. That seems
so
less
that
daunting to me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's how that's the kind of mindset we need to have when we plan. And so when we plan that hub to hub flight Atlanta Amsterdam, we need to make sure that those planes are our best products and also our biggest products, as in the airplanes with the most seats, because there are so many different passenger combination that can go through that flight of Atlanta Amsterdam.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, so interesting. Okay, Jujin, I'm curious to know, when you graduated from high school, and
Uh-huh.
first of all, um, Cornell, like, you must be super smart because it's
Uh,
for
no,
this
I'm
job.
not.
Um,
No.
but Yeah, like so you graduated high school. Did you know right away that you wanted to work in hospitality, or was it something that you had to kind of explore and discover for yourself while you were in college?
Yeah, hospitality was I knew coming out of high school because when I applied to Cornell, I applied specifically for that hospitality program in mind. So I made that realization back in senior year of high school, that I wanted to be in the hotel industry. But I think the what I had in mind before I entered the workforce is completely different from what I had in mind graduating. Because when I as a freshman in Cornell, my ultimate goal in hospitality was to work in Las Vegas, because that's like the epic mecca of hotels, and
Yeah. I mean, I
and
have a few friends that actually majored in hospitality services and things like that
mhm,
too, and um, I think they actually went to school in Nevada. But from what
mhm.
I heard too, like that's kind of the place you want to be.
Right, or so I thought, and so so that's what I was striving for when I was in college. And my internship after my junior year, or between my junior and senior year, I ended up with an internship in Las Vegas, and I thought, oh man, I did it. Like I'm where I want to be, and hopefully this internship turns out well, and I'll get a full time offer after I graduate, and I'll be working in Vegas. And but that internship taught me that I don't want to be in hospitality. And so it actually made me realize, it's like, oh my gosh, this is not what I want to do. But by then I've already invested so much in hospitality and just like working in hotels, that that was kind of like my only option coming out of college, I guess. Um, and so I ended up working for Starwood, as I mentioned, but I ended up working for in the corporate office, so like a desk job, 9 to 5. Because with that internship in Vegas, I realized, oh my gosh, like I kind of don't want to deal with people
Oh, so
every day.
when you were interning in Vegas, you were like upfront? Is that what you're?
Yeah. So I was like, dealing with customers, walking around the hotel in a suit, and like, I thought I was cool, but in fact, it really wasn't. And so just like, I think Vegas, it also attracts a certain kind of crowd.
Sure.
And so I was just so sick of dealing with those kind of people. Very obnoxious. I mean, could be very obnoxious, like sometimes there's like drunk people, and it's just like I could not see myself doing that for the rest of my life. And
Right.
also, hotels are pretty much all hotels are 24/7 operation, regardless of Christmas, regardless of if it's 3 a.m. So, I had to work a lot of like funky shifts, working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. sometimes, working on Sundays, and that made me miss church, which I that's not something that I wanted to give up. And I've worked plenty of holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and all of that. Especially because you're at the bottom of the ladder, so you get all the worst shifts. Um, and for me, I always wanted to have I always wanted to be a family oriented person. So I knew that this kind of career was not sustainable in the long run, um, which is why I ended up kind of like shifting my mindset to the corporate setting, and then just kind of like moving on from there.
Wow. Okay. So,
Yeah.
how do your first job at Starwood? Did you just find that through a recruiter, or how did that work right out of college?
Yeah, that one, it was through a recruiter. So because we were a hotel, because it was a hotel school program, we had a lot of like hospitality recruiters come through, and so that's just kind of, I guess, like the typical way, that I found it as a college senior.
That's awesome. I just feel like so. When you first started at Starwood as a revenue manager, is
Management,
that
revenue
management?
management analyst.
um, um, and you had, done this internship in Vegas and you're working in corporate now. Did you feel like, okay, this is more my pace at that moment?
Yeah, for sure. I think just the whole, like, just the fact that I could get the weekends off and I could get the holidays to myself. I think that was like, it's like, okay, like this is for me. Just because that's where because I valued family time, and those kind of things. So yeah, I think as soon as I know like a lot of people are not about that 9 to 5 desk job, but like for me it was a great fit, which is why I'm still doing like a 9 to 5 desk job.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think a lot of people like, or me personally, I like the schedule of things. I feel like I would hate working all those odd hours and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
just kind of being on call all the time. But maybe somebody,
Mm.
there might be people that I guess enjoy that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but so I'm curious, Chujin. So as you were talking and explaining kind of the details of your job, um, like what kind of characteristics or like personality traits about yourself do you think are like helpful in what you do?
Um, hmm, that's a good question. I think, well, definitely like like I consider myself very high in attention to detail. And I think that helps in the forecasting aspects of it, because when you do forecast, you're basically trying to predict what's going to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen. So you're just trying to like create that forecast based on the understanding that you do have and the data that you do have. And so I think when it comes to that, like having that attention to detail, I think was key for me. I found that as a benefit. Other than that, I think, and this is something that I'm struggling with that would be good for this role, is the your like whether you're okay with ambiguity or not, because there's a lot of ambiguity in network planning, especially because it's a lot of long-term planning. And so, because you might be planning for one thing based on assumptions XYZ, but then if your competitor, American Airlines or United, if they come in all of a sudden and they announce that they're going to fly this thing that you were planning to fly, it's like, well, now that throws all of your forecasts off, and that throws all of your assumptions off. And obviously you don't know what they've been working on. So sometimes we often get these kind of like surprise like announcements from other airlines, like, oh, they're going to start flying this 7 times a week, and they're going to be using their latest aircraft, and we're like, dang it, we were going to serve that market, but like
Right.
now but now it looks like we are the followers and not the leaders. And that we're going to have some added competition that we weren't accounting for. And so it's back to the drawing board. Then we need to change the assumptions in the forecast, and to do different types of analysis to make sure that, okay, even with this new addition of like a new competitor in the market, are we still going to be profitable? And so there were a lot of times where we had to be kind of we had to go back to the drawing board to make sure that our plans still worked in terms of profitability. So that, yeah, so there is a lot of ambiguity in that sense. And yeah, I guess that would be one of the other things.
Man, I would be so frustrated. I mean, I mean, I guess
It
you
is
get
it
used to it. You get used to it, but
Yeah.
then in the moment, I think I'd be like, "What?"
Yeah, it is frustrating, and it does freak out a lot of the leaders sometimes. And so but then it is what it is, and it's basically all the work that you did the past month is just gone, like because now this new um, variable came into the play, and now it's changing things considerably.
So there is this like kind of like almost like a race then even sometimes like between different airlines.
Yeah, I think a good like an analogy might be like network planning is similar to like a game of chess. So like for example, but with like multiple care with multiple players. So like for example, in your head, you might think, okay, I'm gonna move this rook here and then knight there, and then okay, and then that will set me up for success. But then the competitors are also having their own set of moves that they're gonna do. So with each move, that you have to change your strategy and then figure out, okay, like well that I wasn't anticipating that, but now I got to think of something else to to get ahead. And so like I think chess would be a good analogy in terms of like that network planning aspect, especially because it is a very competitive landscape that we're in. And airlines, like our margins aren't like like as good as some of the other industries. So we need to be just really careful in how we plan things, especially in the context of competitors.
That's so interesting. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Again, I'm like stressed thinking about it, but I know it's your element. So I'm like, but so what do you like about your job? Like, is there something that you really enjoy to do or enjoy doing while you're
Um,
there?
I guess the fun part about network planning, I guess, is for me meeting up with the partners, because you work with such a different group of people. You know, because just culturally we're just so different. So for me in network planning, I'm working with the Dutch, working with the French, and working with the British people. And so just like meeting with them, and before all COVID and stuff, we would meet, on a quarterly basis, so once a quarter, and that entailed either them coming to us or us visiting them in Amsterdam, or wherever in Europe. And so the trip itself is obviously really exciting. But yeah, just working with such different group of people, I think has been like really good for me, just because being exposed to just very different, I guess, like point of views, and just very diverse work habits. And so yeah, that's been probably the most exciting part about like what I do in network planning.
Oh, that is cool. I
Yeah.
didn't imagine that you would have to meet other people from different countries and stuff like that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, mostly with just our partners, and even with my other role at Delta with revenue management. So that one I worked on the Pacific side. So I met with Korean Air and Virgin Australia, very regularly, and so that's also that was a really cool part of that job as well.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So what is there anything that you don't like about your job?
I think, as I kind of mentioned before, like the ambiguity of it, um, because like for me, my personality is like I like black and white. Like I like to know what I'm doing, and I'm a planner,
Me
but not
too.
in a network planning kind of sense. But like, I like to know what I'm doing. I like to know where I'm headed. But network planning, because it could be so ambiguous, that's been frustrating for me at times, and also oftentimes we have a lot of, so obviously like profitability is our number one goal, but sometimes for strategic reasons we're willing to lose money to compete. And so I think that has been a little bit frustrating for me, like, because I understand the strategic need of it, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense to me that we're still willing to operate a certain flight even though we're losing money.
Mm.
But but in terms of, I guess, like our executive leaders at Delta, they think they're obviously playing the long game. So sometimes those kind of things come into play. And for me, like, I get it. I get why we have to do it. But for me to create a forecast that says it's going to lose money, but yet we're going to fly it, it like just doesn't sit well with me, if
Mm.
that makes sense. But I totally understand the business decision and why we need to fly a flight at a loss. But it's just, yeah, it just doesn't sit well with me in terms of like my peace of mind, I guess.
Right, right. That makes
Yeah.
sense. So Jujin, you mentioned a couple of times through our conversation, like pre-COVID, um, as opposed to now. I don't
Mhm.
know if you were able to speak on this a little bit, but how has COVID affected your job, like in what it is that you're doing?
It's been crazy. I guess I guess it was most crazy like right around March, April when it first hit. And so as I mentioned, my team specifically, we work on the transatlantic. And so back in March, the Trump administration, they did the ban on European travel. So basically, I don't know if I remember the numbers correctly, but basically we would be flying, I think it was about 96 flights a day to Europe, from the US to Europe. But overnight, we changed that to like 2 flights a day, because we weren't allowed to fly it. And so once the ban came into place, basically all the bookings, like pretty much like 95% of the bookings just kind of like burned off. It got canceled because the customers knew that they weren't, either they knew that they couldn't fly, or they had no idea what was going on. So like out of confusion, they just played it safe and canceled. So, literally like 95% of our bookings just disappeared overnight, and continues to disappear. So our flights, our network had to shrink because we can't be flying empty planes. That flying a plane costs a lot of money.
Right.
So when the pandemic first hit, we basically cut our flights by like 95, 98%. We were only operating two flights. And even those two flights were only like 20, 30% full. And so it was really stressful because we didn't know what to do. And we didn't know, it was so unprecedented that even all of our reporting and all of our metrics that we were looking at, it didn't matter anymore because we're just at a whole nother level of operating. And so that was pretty crazy. And I think once we kind of got used to that new normal, we started building our network back up, going from 2 flights to 3, and then 3 to 5, and then we kind of like hovered around 12 flights a day
Which is still
for a bit.
crazy, like 12
Yeah, which is still
flights.
crazy low. Yeah. Compared to pre-COVID, which was like high 90s each day. So yeah, so all that to say, like, work has slowed down considerably because you can't really plan the transatlantic network if people can't fly and enter the European countries. So yeah, ultimately the work has slowed down considerably. Obviously, we're being optimistic and hopeful and trying to plan for the future. But again, there's just so much uncertainty, so much ambiguity. We have no idea when the vaccine will be available. We have no idea when the travel ban will be lifted. So it's just a lot of kind of like running different types of scenarios to see which one is more realistic. And even then, we find a new set of assumptions and then we have to run it again, run the plan again. And then something new happens. And then, like COVID cases start rising up again, or, UK just recently locked down again. Same with France. So like that, throws a wrench into our plan again. So it's been just constant reiteration of different scenarios based on our, what's happening out there in terms of government policies or travel bans and things like that. COVID cases
So,
rising, blah blah blah.
yeah. So insane. Like just this time that we're
Yeah,
in right now. Um
yeah,
and I just feel like, yeah, I mean, your job I feel like would be hit the hardest. I mean, there are plenty of
yeah.
people that are struggling right now, but I just like no one's flying. And like I'm curious,
Yeah.
those 12 flights a day, like who's flying?
So yeah, I mean, yeah. So those are like very. So if you are a EU citizen, you can still fly back and forth. So it's mostly people repatriating back home. So Europeans that were in the US going. I want to. I think most of the passengers are those, but also you can get special exemptions if you are going for like diplomatic missions or like other. I think there were just certain key criteria that you have to meet for you to be able to enter the EU. So it just really depends, but it's mostly just repatriations.
Oh gosh, so
Yeah.
interesting. All of it is just so crazy. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, again, just being far removed from travel in general, I would imagine that things have changed, but to this extent, it's just so crazy to even think about that. There's just like a few flights a day. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Do you even know, like, domestically too? Like, has that significantly decreased as well, or is it about the
Um,
same?
no, it did decrease significantly, but I don't know the extent of it. But definitely, it's made a noticeable impact. And there's just not too many business travelers flying, and that's where we make most of our money.
Sure,
So
yeah.
the airline as a whole is still struggling just because the good traffic isn't there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, Chujin, I think we're coming to the end of our time together. I really appreciate just all the information because I feel like,
Yeah.
again, this is a lot of stuff that people don't think about. And I feel like
Mm.
there could be people that find this like, I mean, I find it fascinating.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I would be good for this type of job, but but I feel like there would be people that are. And for people that, are listening that are like, man, network planning for an airline or even just going into hospitality in general, do you have any
Uh-huh.
advice for them?
Uh, um, I don't know. I guess like don't be afraid to try something new. Because like airline, it's not something I was striving for. It's not something where I imagined to go. Because for me, it's always been hotels, hotels, hotels. But an opportunity came up, and I knew nothing about the airlines, yet I made that jump, like just kind of a leap of faith. Like, well, I think it's similar enough where I can transfer my skills, and thankfully I did. And and I've been with Delta for over 4.5 years now.
Wow.
And it's been an amazing experience, just as a company, and just being able to travel, and just airline industry is just so unique. So yeah, like I guess if I never made that leap of faith, like I would have never had this 4.5 years of experience here. And I would have probably worked at a hotel, and working weekends, and something working weekends and weird shifts that nobody wants. So I think yeah, just giving that chance to try something new. I think it has been helpful for me. Even going from revenue management to network planning, I knew nothing about network planning, but I knew that there was an opportunity for me to learn and learn new set of skills and new set of information about the airline. So I made that jump, and it's been a great learning experience. And so yeah, I think just taking that, being open to different and unexpected experiences, I think has been helpful, at least in my career path, to get me to where I am today.
That's awesome. That's really good advice
Yeah.
for just life in general. Try something new.
Yeah, I hope
Don't be
so.
afraid.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, so great for me about doing this podcast is, trying to expose the fear of the unknown, and
Mhm.
yeah, you've never heard of network planning. Let me give you a little taste from Joojin,
Yeah.
and maybe you'll think about it. And so I think that's really
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much. By the way, I don't even know if you know the answer to this, but like your coworkers in network planning, do you happen to know like their education background? I'm just curious, like, is there like a major that people should study to
Oh,
like?
I think network planning is a little bit unusual, where there are a handful of people that actually studied like airline management.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I mean, my boss just has like a business degree, but my director, he actually studied airline management in Embry-Riddle, and so actually a lot of our network planning colleagues come from Embry-Riddle, and I think like Purdue also has airline management program. So network planning is full of a lot of those people, but obviously in revenue management, it's a lot more diverse in terms of our educational backgrounds. So I think network planning might be a little bit of an outlier. But yes, there is apparently a major for airline management.
Interesting. I
Yeah,
see, just learning all kinds of
yeah,
new things.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jujin, for your time today. If you guys have any questions about today's episode, or you're just interested in learning more about network planning, revenue management, hospitality, anything at all, or you just want to get to know Jujin, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you. Please feel free to DM me through social media, or you can email us at podcastwigu@gmail.com. Thanks so much, guys. Until next time. Bye.
Thank you.